You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com.
Is Bob Costas done now? Will we have to watch him anymore in any broadcast? I want to know this for sure. I mean, the Yankees win that series over the Royals. I found myself kind of rooting for the Royals because Mike Massey was playing so well, right? I'm a Brother Rice alum on the South Side. We went to the same school. We know the same people, even though we haven't met before. And, you know, we had a big hit at one point in that series, and I found myself rooting for the Royals just because I was rooting for an individual player from the South Side from the neighborhood. So I was kind of into them there. They end up losing. But Costas, did you see the thing where he yells line drive base hit center field as the ball is being caught by the shortstop as it's dying 4 feet beyond second base? I don't even know if it made it to the grass. He is terrible. Somebody needs to tell Bob it's time to retire. Never let him call a baseball game, yay, a sporting event again. He can sit at the desk at the Olympics and wax poetic about the beauty of sport, and he can give big long form interviews about old time baseball players, and he can do really good at that stuff. Play by play, you done, Bob. I don't want to see you anymore out there.
Well, it's a sad fact, but I mean, every play by play, great. Okay, and Bob Costas is a legend. Okay, and there's no doubt about it that he deserves the opportunity to go out on his own shield and of his own volition, but there comes a point where most of the broadcasters at least understand that maybe the speed of the game is passing by, which is shocking to say in baseball. But if you think back to the end of Pat Summerall and John Madden, okay, it got to a point where Summerall's calls of the play-by-play were so behind the play.
Summerall didn't know where he was.
He had no idea what was going on. Or think back, Harry Carey at the end of his tenure with the Cubs, the ball would have been in the bleachers and thrown out, and he's still going, it might be, it could be. And no, Harry, it was. You can't say it is, it was. It's already done. They've moved on to the next batter.
I remember that. Right at the end, he had one. I think it was when Sosa was there, but I don't know. I just envision all the home runs being Sosa because he was cheating and hitting so many of them. But the ball comes off the bat, and he's like, it might be, as it's landing in the outfield. And then let's say it's Sosa around second base, and he's already coming around second base. Everybody's cheering. They're all slapping high fives, and he's like, it could be. And Sosa comes all the way around, and I'm thinking to myself, is he doing a bit? Why is he waiting so long? And he touches the plate, and he's back in the dugout, and the other guy's walking up to the plate, and suddenly you hear, it is! And then Steve Stone at the time, who's his color guy, just is chuckling because he's just Harry, he did do it. He did it a while ago. He's just that smarmy
Ball
Stone
two
thing
on
comes
Grace.
out. Yeah, exactly.
And it's Costas is, I don't even know how old Bob Costas is, but he's not a young man anymore. Play-by-play is a hard thing to do. We all listen to Hawk Harrelson at the end too, sort of get really erratic.
Well, no, he would just stop speaking. Hawk would get angry about something that happened and then take his microphone and put it in a drawer or turn it off or storm off or who knows what he was doing. Or maybe I always envisioned him when he would do that, folding his arms, sticking out his lower lip like an angry child, just making a face, and then just sitting there with that stone cold face, I'm not speaking, right? It's just when he was doing that, I would chuckle. When you were watching a television broadcast with him at the end and he would not talk for and then you would hear the color person that's sitting with him try to describe the game a little bit. And then finally he'd get tired of the silent treatment like a little kid. You get a kid that says, I'm not speaking to you anymore. And I say little kid, my 18-year-old did it to me right before she went off to college. She was mad at me about something. She tried
I was saying that this is sort of children in general.
He tried to give me the silent treatment.
The funny part of the silent treatment, my 7-year-old tried that one day, and she would come out of her room periodically, just look at me and stamp her foot and just let me know that she's still not talking to me. What she didn't understand was I was getting so much done in that time period while my daughter was not speaking to me.
Yeah.
that it was amazing. It was great. I was like, oh, thank God she's not talking to me. Like sometimes I'll piss my kids off just so they don't talk to me for a few hours.
Yeah, when a kid decides that he wants nothing to do with you, when he or she goes, I don't want anything to do with dad for the next 4 or 5 hours, you take that with a smile. They think that you're getting hurt by it. But Hawk would finally do that, just like a kid. Like he would sit there and he would wait, and then all of a sudden he would be like, he would just blurt something out. Like Stone would be sitting there, or whoever he had, like, you know, who was sitting next to him, because it happened with even with fill-in guys. And he would just jump in, and he would just, like, in the middle of a thing, he would just start doing it again. Like, he couldn't keep himself quiet enough. And that would be the moment on my couch that I would start laughing.
Yeah, when you're sitting there and it's 3 innings later, and you haven't heard from Hawk, and Stoney's been sitting there going and doing his best, his level best to try and call the game, and doing his color thing while still trying to fill in some of the action. And then out of nowhere, it's 2 outs in the 7th inning, and you just hear, "Damn it, Wegner!" Like, what the hell?
The other thing that I noticed from the playoffs since last we spoke is that teams are still making the mistake of pitching to Jose Ramirez. And
why are you doing that?
It didn't make any sense in that 4th game of Detroit and Cleveland. I mean, it was a meatball pitch too, and he took it right out of the ballpark, and they're lucky there was nobody on base. But teams are still pitching to him, and I find it funny. Like, in the middle of the regular season, I don't understand why you would pitch to him. And I definitely am not pitching to him. I think that was the 5th inning of that game in Game 4. 5th inning. So now he's already seen this pitcher. You're in a tie ball game, and he can hurt you, and every base is available. Like sometimes the lack of moves are the worst moves in a baseball game.
Well, and especially Ramirez in that Guardians lineup. I mean, he's basically, you get the Barry Bonds treatment for him, right? I mean, you'd almost walk him with the bases loaded in the right situation, just to avoid extra damage being done, because he's really, not only is he heads and tails their best hitter, but he is absolutely positively, not being surrounded by guys who are frightening and all that much.
He's the only one. He's the only one in the lineup that would frighten me. And so if you only have one guy, I mean, think about this. If the White Sox one day make the postseason, try not to laugh, but the White Sox one day make the postseason, and you've got one really good hitter. I mean, I'm trying to come up with a good example for this, but let's take prime Luis Robert Jr. when Luis Robert Jr. is actually like playing. Not this year, Luis Robert Jr. Let's say it's last year, Luis Robert Jr.
Right.
Last year, Luis Robert Jr., and somehow that team makes it into the postseason. There's nothing else in the lineup that you're afraid of. Even if they would have gone out and added a bat or two, they wouldn't have added a bat or two that would have been scary. He would have been the only scary thing. He had just under 40 home runs that year. He was stealing bases left and right. He was the whole offense. You wouldn't pitch to him. And so, like, with Ramirez, there is talent on that team. They've got guys who can hit the ball. They've got some exciting players that are on that Guardians team. There's a reason they're the 2 seed. But he's a completely different player. And it's funny to me to watch managers, like, not say this guy gets special treatment. I don't understand that. I feel like it's a new thing. I feel like maybe analytics have started to make these guys believe that there's a way to get every guy out. Well, if you pitch him this perfect way and you get him in this situation, everybody can be taken out. All you are is one mistake pitch. And that was a mistake pitch. There's no way he intended to put the ball nearly dead center without any movement.
No, that was definitely a mistake. I mean, you look at the replay of that, and it's not what he wanted to do. It's not what he wanted to do in that scenario. And you're right about the analytics of it. And AJ Hinch is, a guy that does know something about that. And you do wonder, though, too, if some of the things that they do in the regular season, some of the things that Hinch maybe thought, this has worked before. And again, I don't know the stats off the top of my head of what the Tigers did against Ramirez in the regular season. But there's also something to be said in the playoffs about, being real careful around hot hitters and really good hitters and the best hitter in the lineup and the guy that can really do the most damage. Because the hitters, as tired as they may be after 162 plus games, the pitchers are exhausted. Yeah, there's a much greater chance that a pitcher whose hands are sore, his elbows sore, his shoulders sore, his legs are sore, everything hurts, everything is tired, everything is jello after a full season, is going to sit there and, yep, that ball just slipped out. It did not do what I wanted it to do. That happens a lot in the playoffs, which is what kind of makes the playoffs exciting too, because when a pitcher is really, really good and really, really on, it's really kind of a marvel to watch. but you see these crucial mistakes getting made, right? You think about and again, I feel like we're picking on a lot of interesting past stuff here, but Dennis Eckersley, who was at the time the best closer in baseball by far, still serves up something to Kirk Gibson. That's, a legendary moment in World Series and Major League history, watching that,
But you would have pitched to Gibson because he was injured and nobody even expected him to play. You would have pitched him.
I'm not saying that La Russa should have walked Gibson in that situation. I'm actually taking it to, with Hinch, even if the analytics say that this is perfect, you still have to think about what it is that, the pitcher has in the tank versus what it is that the hitter has in the tank. And in that situation, Jose Ramirez has a lot in the tank.
A little bit of a chill in the morning, even though it seems to warm up by midday. Perfect time to get some windows. You want a window? I need new windows. You need new windows? Let's go to Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. Exterior windows, doors, patio doors, storm doors with no high-pressure sales. You go see them, they don't see you. That way you get to see everything in full living color instead of a picture in a book. The owner is in showroom. There's also one on site. All Window and Door Superstore installers, they don't farm out the work. They've been doing it this way for over 40 years and in Oak Forest since 1985. All major brands, custom made, no stock items. That way you get a perfect fit. They are a half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. So let's talk about some of these managers that the White Sox are rumored to be around. We're going to hear a lot of this stuff. You're not probably going to hear about a hiring for a little while. It seems like a giant net is being cast, and that's something you really want. You really hope that it's not, we're going to throw out a big giant net, and then we're going to just keep Grady. And I find it funny that so many people want Grady before we get into some of these names. Like I've seen some online polls. I've seen fans write comments underneath our shows, like on social media. People have sent things in and everybody's like, well, I think Grady's a nice guy. I think we should. I get that you think he's a nice guy. He's a good looking guy. He's got a great smile. The players seem to like him. Is he a Major League Baseball manager for 162? Is this who you want around? I think if you keep Grady Sizemore, you're telling me it's going to be half a decade before you're any good. It's like sit back and relax. And I don't think that it's going to take that long, folks. We talked about it on the last show. You have a lot of pitching. Some teams don't have that. You've got a lot of young pitching. And you got to want to turn it around. Sure, you're not going to probably compete for the postseason in 25, but you got to really have your eye on the ball to get back turned around quickly with this amount of pitching that you have. You got a lot of young guys, and they're going to come of age over the next year or so. And they're going to be up there, and they're going to be doing very, very well. And you're going to want to be able to add bats. Like I said, you got lots of playoff flexibility, and you're going to want to have a manager that's going to be able to take advantage of when all of a sudden things are starting to click for the team. So the Sizemore thing, I wouldn't be pounding my fist on the bar angry if they brought him back, but I'd be disappointed. And I'm surprised by how many people don't seem like they would be disappointed in that. They'd be like, oh, he's a good guy. Let's keep him around. I really would like to see them go out, do a real search and pick a guy.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's hard to fathom that Grady has enough to really do what the White Sox need to have done, which is not an easy task for somebody who's never done it before.
Well, I mean, is he able to teach? Is he able to also do in-game? I mean, here's the things he has that's going for him. Here's what he has going for him. Works well with the front office. Have not seen that from a manager in a while, right? I mean, like La Russa wasn't working well with his front office because his buddy put him in there and he didn't need to listen to anybody. Pedro clearly wasn't getting along with Getz because Pedro was actually talking about the lack of communication, and Getz clearly didn't want this fool around and was stuck with him a lot longer than he wanted to keep him, right? And so there's been issues. I mean, we even had, if you go back to Renteria, even though things were working very well with Han at the beginning, at the end there was a disconnect. You could see it. Who's actually making the lineups, and Ricky wanted to go in one direction in terms of development, and Han ready to say, no, we're ready to take the next step. Now I want you to manage differently. We've seen some manager front office dysfunction here for a while. So that's, at least he checks the box of he gets what they're doing, and he isn't going to get in Chris Getz and the rest of the guys that he's employed to develop and everything else like that. He's not going to get in the front office's way. He checks that box at least. Buck Showalter doesn't check that box.
No, Buck Showalter comes in with a real preconceived idea of what Buck Showalter wants to do in a dugout. And, any other established manager, Mike Scioscia would be the same way, right? Whether or not they get along with Chris Getz, that's going to be up to Getz to determine. And I would say it's foolhardy to believe that you're going to find a manager and a general manager who are always going to be 100% in agreement with each other, because at some point and on some level, Getz is going to believe in players that the manager sees something on the field that they don't like, or Getz is really going to have made an acquisition or done something to the roster that is going to upset how the manager liked to use the players. And it could be something minor, something like sitting there saying, we're going to start doing bullpen days when a starting pitcher goes down, as opposed to bringing up somebody to fill in the rotation spot. I mean, stuff like that can cause friction between manager and general manager. So I'm not really worried about whether or not there would ever be friction or never be friction, but I agree with you. Grady Sizemore and Chris Getz get along very well with each other. They seem to be in lockstep. And that's partially because I think Grady doesn't have a feel for what he wants to be as a manager and hasn't asserted himself.
And Grady's happy to be there. He was hitting a time clock in Arizona as an intern, getting paid $15 an hour, and he's a Major League Baseball manager. I mean, like that. Like, if you ever wanted a manager in the dugout that doesn't even know that he can say no to the front office, like, that's the guy.
Right.
Right? Like, he's just happy to be there if you make him the manager. He's just like, man, I'm living the dream. Like, I mean, if he's hired for that. He's hired because he will never argue with his boss. That's what that hire is.
And he can teach. And I will say this, I think this is probably true about Grady Sizemore. He is a recent enough player that he has a feel for the current game. He was a guy that had a lot of success in the majors. Remember, it was injuries that cost Grady Sizemore. It's not a guy who was like, really good for a year or two, and then all of a sudden, for no discernible reason, stopped being able to hit. He's been there. So I always think that, a guy that was a successful major league player, played for a couple different organizations, has the ability to be able to pass that knowledge on. Okay. So he can teach and he can work well with Chris Getz. So he is basically an instructor that is going to have to walk out, fill out a lineup card, and occasionally go out and look a lot prettier than the umpire he's arguing with. Buck Showalter, I'm sure, can pass on some knowledge as well. I'm sure that some of the coaches that are getting fired, there's a bloodletting of coaches in the Braves organization. That's a very successful organization, but they just decided after this year that, their hitting coach, Kevin Seitzer, had to go. They fired two other coaches with him. There's guys that are going to be out there once the playoffs are done and going to be available to talk to that can also teach, but also maybe have a better feel for what they want to do as a manager, have a better feel for the in-game stuff. I don't know Grady Sizemore well enough to know if he can do the X's and O's part of it. I do think that there are players who really do understand the nature of the game, and they do make excellent managers. A lot of times, and you and I have talked about this, you see shortstops and catchers doing that because they're so involved. They're the captains of the infield, and the catcher's involved in everything that happens on the field. That doesn't mean a center fielder can't do that. It doesn't mean that it's not there. So if Grady Sizemore is retained, what I hope is that he's retained on the basis that after talking to some of these managers that are out there that have done it, that we know can win ball games, that we know can put a team in the playoffs and take a team really far and deep into the playoffs, or that have come from organizations where that is the norm, the expectation that every year they're going to go and they're going to have a playoff run, a World Series run. After all of that, we were not impressed that they knew the game better than Grady Sizemore, or that they were able to work with Chris Getz, or that Chris Getz felt the energy and the synergy and the other buzzwords with Grady Sizemore, things like that. If they come out and say that, the proof will be 100% what happens on the field and whether or not he is completely overmatched and is Robin Ventura 2.0, or whether or not he is able to actually pull it off. And it's, stranger things happen in the game of baseball.
On the phone line with me right now, the Sox nerd, Dave Marin, who puts all those incredible tidbits up on the scoreboard at the rate during the season and joins us year-round here on Sox in the Basement, where there is no off-season. And he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore. Check out this weekend a Monster Mash Carnival at the Forge for all ages, and next weekend a fall color walk and everything they have going on in the Village each and every day at LamontDowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for me?
Chris, Harry Chappas passed recently. For those of you who don't remember Harry, he put the short into shortstop for the White Sox during the heart of Bill Veeck's second ownership. The Maryland native made his big league debut for the Sox in late 1978 and hit .267 in 20 games. Chappas burst onto the national scene the following March when he landed on the cover of Sports Illustrated's rookie issue with the headline, quote, "The Littlest Rookie." Spoiler alert, Chappas was one of the first victims of the SI cover jinx. Sports Illustrated dubbed Chappas the littlest rookie because he was short. How short is a matter of debate. Harry Carey claimed at the time Chappas was 5'3". The common belief was that he was 5'5". Baseball Reference, which is the source I go by, lists Harry at 5'7". The combination of Barnum Bill Veeck, who once sent 3'7" Eddie Goodell to bat, and Chappas led many to believe that Chappas's quick promotion from Class A to the big leagues was just a stunt. The fact that there were a few cringy staged photos during spring training of 1979 didn't do much to dispel that fact. Chappas never really took to the hype in his desire to be more than just a sideshow. While Harry did open 1979 as a Sox shortstop, he was sent to the minors because of a base running gaffe. He played 26 games in both 1979 and 1980 and never played in the bigs again. In case you were wondering, the shortest player in White Sox history, according to Baseball Reference, is 5'5" Jess Cortazzo, whom I've referenced on this pod before. The 18-year-old grounded out third to first as a pinch hitter for Red Faber in his only MLB at-bat in the Sox 14-6 win over Cleveland on September 1st, 1923 at Comiskey Park. The shortest pitchers in Sox history measured 5'6", and they were Hall of Famer Clark Griffith, Elmer Strickland, and Jose Acosta, who all pitched before 1923. The shortest Sox pitcher of recent vintage was 5'9" Davy Garcia, and the last time the Sox had a left-handed pitcher shorter than 5'10" was 5'9" Vic Derensburg in 2004. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there is plenty of Sox nerd material on Twitter. My zinger, how about one on another dead guy, Pete Rose? Did you know, Chris, Charlie Hustle played his first ever game for his hometown Cincinnati Reds against the White Sox? It's true. On March 10th, 1963, in his spring training debut, Rose doubled to start the 14th inning and later scored in the Reds' 1-0 win over the Sox in Tampa Bay in his inaugural Grapefruit League game. That's it, Chris. Probably more than you wanted to know on Harry Chappas, Bill Veeck, Short People, and Pete Rose.
Well, Phil Nevin is interesting.
Phil Nevin is interesting.
I was looking at him. His name's come up now, Phil Nevin. And you see that he got the interim when Joe Madden was fired. And then he gets a full year where he gets to manage the Angels. And he gets like 1 year where they kind of like let him hang around. They're not sure what they're going to do as an organization. I think they were going to put the place up, the thing up for sale. There was all this stuff that was going on. So it was like, just keep this guy around and let him manage. And he goes 73 and 89 in that single season. And the guy who takes over after him, which is Ron Washington, he doesn't do as well with him. So he's an interesting name. Is like a guy who's been around baseball, had a good taste, really wasn't fired because it was a good team that he couldn't win with, right? Like he was a guy who, it was a bad team. It was a team that was so bad, Joe Madden lost his job, right? I mean, Joe Madden's not a bad manager. I've always thought he was a good manager. A little weird, not a bad manager. I'm not going to say that he's probably the reason they were bad. It's because the Angels are put together poorly. It's very similar to the White Sox. Like the Angels are a dysfunctional organization from top to bottom. And so that's kind of what he had to be inside of. Maybe he'd be used to it here, but like, he's probably not the reason that they lost. So here's a guy with experience that has the ability to possibly come in here and do the things that Chris Getz wants to do. I would imagine he would be a very interesting interview. If he says the right things, he could very quickly be a guy at the top of the list.
Yeah, and there's going to be guys that are going to be more interesting than Grady Sizemore or some of the early names that have popped up. It's yet to be seen, I think, who really has a chance. And I'm not going to get mad about a rumor at this stage until that person that I don't really want to see here is interviewed. And I'm not going to get overly excited about a rumor until I see that person is actually interviewed.
You can't get excited like Will Venable, everybody's excited about. I mean, this is the guy who's the Rangers bench coach. Everybody wants him. The Mets tried to hire him. He turned down the Mets. Supposedly he's waiting for Bochy to leave, and then he's like the heir apparent. And he's like the pie in the sky one because everybody wants him. And I always worry about the everybody wants this guy thing because, like, I don't know. I feel like we've done that before. We go after something that everybody wants, and then we go, "Oh, this didn't work out." But he's a guy that seems to be one of those names that if the Sox were to get him, national pundits would be like, "This is a great hire." Like, people would love this hire across baseball if they were able to get him, which is probably why the White Sox won't be able to get him. But he's popping around, and then the Cardinals have a bench coach by the name of Daniel Descalso, and he's on the list supposedly as well. That's from John Heyman. And a lot of people are putting out like, this guy's up for this job, this guy's up for this job. This Descalso, he got into the big leagues during La Russa's last reign in St. Louis.
He was one of Tony's utility infielders. He was Daniel Descalso was a Skip Schumacher 2.0, whatever, 3.0, 8.0. I'm tired of putting .0s on it, but Daniel Descalso and Skip Schumacher are basically the same dude.
And it seems like he may have worked with Barfield in Arizona in 23.
Well, that's possible, yeah.
That's why his name's probably popping up. Because there's like, when they go through the list, it's like, well, I know this guy. Well, I know this guy too. It doesn't necessarily mean he's getting the job, but that's a name I've never heard of. And that's how these things work with these hirings. That's how it works with these teams.
Honestly, Daniel Descalso, the last time I heard his name was probably in some waiver wire on a fantasy baseball league that I was in, where I was wondering if, his run of 2 weeks of starting while the starter was on IL was going to, net me some extra points or something like that. I
think one of the things that I'm waiting for is to find out what type of manager they get, because I think that's going to indicate, do these other coaches stick around? You look at some of these teams that got eliminated from the postseason, they're cleaning out like assistant coaches. And we're so loyal to these assistant coaches that are around, like all these guys are in limbo because like the new guy might want them. And it's interesting to me because some of these names that we're talking about, right? Like a Phil Nevin probably walks in and goes, I know enough other guys. I want to go this direction. I mean, he may have to justify it, but he might want his own thing. Buck Showalter is not keeping any. That's the funniest thing about it. He ain't keeping any of these guys. He's coming in, he's bringing in his own group, but then some of these other guys might sit there and say, yeah, if you hire me, I mean, I don't know who I'd bring in. You tell me who you want to have as a coach. I mean, like, and that's one of the more dysfunctional things that the White Sox do, is that they don't let the guy who comes in pick his staff. Like they gave Pedro a couple of staff members, and then when he left, they left. They have their guys that are basically hired by the organization in some of these roles that the manager doesn't really get a say over. And I would just love if the new guy gets to walk in and pick his staff. Like, I don't care what what has anybody on this staff accomplished that justifies them sticking around? Like, has Ethan Katz really been that good?
Well, that was the name that immediately, as soon as you said that, I'm like, why is Ethan Katz still here?
Like, why?
Exactly.
What have any of these guys done in their tenure here that are assistant coaches that justifies telling a manager you can have the job if you accept this guy? Because I haven't seen it. There's nothing that is overarching like, well, you can't let this guy walk out the door and be a pitching coach somewhere else. We can't let this guy walk out the door and be a hitting coach somewhere else. We can't let this guy walk out the door and bullpen catch over here instead of with us. Like, they should have cleaned out the entire staff. And they should have told the manager, you get to come in and pick everything. They should have made this something that managers really want because they know they're not going to have to deal with that garbage. Like, if Getz wants to signify that he's doing things differently and working for the White Sox is different now because he's in the front office and things are going to be different, that's one of the things that I'm surprised he didn't do. He should have just cleaned all these guys out. Unless he's sitting there in the meeting going, look, we just don't think it's fair to throw a guy out in the street. We want to keep paying him, but these guys are all gone. But like, it should be like almost a known thing that they're gone. that it's completely up to the new manager if you really want to get the best candidates to come in.
You have the worst record
In
in the history of Major League Baseball. Tell me why anybody on the coaching staff gets the benefit of the doubt, with the exception maybe of Grady Sizemore or anybody that served in a capacity just at the end of the season.
But even Grady, if the guy comes in and goes, look, Grady's a nice guy. You guys love Grady. That's awesome. But find him another spot to do something in the building. I don't want him in my dugout because I want to start fresh and I want to show these guys in the dugout. Things have changed. Like, isn't that the best message you could possibly make? Like, anybody that comes back to this team walks in and there isn't one coach that they're used to seeing. There isn't one person they can walk over and say, what's the new manager like? What do you think we're going to do here? What do you like? No, they walk in and it's a completely new group that's in lockstep with each other, hand selected by the manager. They all know they answer to him and they don't answer to anybody else. That's how you change a locker room. That's something that they have not been able to do. They never do that in this organization. You really want to say, full stop, we've hit rock bottom, and we're going to prove to anybody that comes back in here that was on this team last year that is not business as usual. It will never be that way again, and we are doing this differently from this point forward. You can't have them look over and see Grady standing there. They can't. They can't look over there and see one of the guys still left over. They have to feel like it's brand new. They have to walk onto the team and say, all right, well, it's the same uniform, it's the same facilities, but something has changed. You don't convince them of that. If a new guy comes in and says, I'm the manager, and when he walks out of the room, you're able to look at the same coaches as last year. And trust, it's just like any other workplace. Something won't go right, and that guy will be like, oh, we were at least better at this last year. That's how you sow the seeds of discontent. You have to clean it all out and start it all over. Grady, I think, is he's clearly valuable. They clearly like him. That's why they brought him over to the organization. That's why they made him just a coach and they didn't give him a title. And they kept him there for when they were going to fire Pedro, and then they gave him the job. Like, it's so obvious that that's what it was. And so they want to keep him around. But you know what? If you think he's going to be a talented manager, stick him in the minor leagues. Give him a chance.
Yeah.
Or find him a role inside the organization, but not in the clubhouse. I think you need to clean out everything in the clubhouse and start fresh if you really want to prove that things are going to be different.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.